Sunday, April 5th, 1992. The morning sun rolled gently over Macon, Georgia, the kind of warm, golden light that wrapped every porch, every magnolia tree, every church steeple in something that felt like grace. On the corner of Vineville Avenue, bells from First Redeemer Baptist Church echoed through the quiet streets, one slow chime at a time. The sound was solemn but sweet, a cue that Sunday had arrived and heaven was near. 15-year-old Rebecca Lynn Walsh stepped out of her family's red brick house just past 8:30 a.m., holding a small leather-bound Bible to her chest. Her dress was pale yellow cotton with soft white lace along the collar. Her mother had ironed it the night before. Her hair, long and brown, was pulled back with a matching ribbon. She smiled at her reflection in the glass door, not for vanity, but because Sundays always made her feel hopeful. She didn't say much that morning, just a soft, "See you after, Mama," as she closed the door behind her. She would never walk back through it. Macon in 1992 was slow-moving and devout, a southern town where God was present in everyday conversation, and your presence at church was a matter of family reputation and rhythm. The Walshes were part of the town's quiet majority working class, God-fearing and loyal to routine. Frank Walsh was a lineman for Georgia Power, often out on call, climbing poles, fixing outages. He wasn't home that morning. Susan Walsh, Rebecca's mother, worked part-time at the high school library and volunteered every other Sunday in the children's ministry. Rebecca had always said she wanted to teach like her mother. Not in public school, though. No, she wanted to teach the Bible. The First Redeemer Baptist Church stood tall with its white columns and steeple, a postcard from the past. Its wooden pews, stained glass windows, and choir robes stitched by hand made it more than just a place of worship. It was the heartbeat of the community. Weddings, funerals, potlucks, town meetings, everything passed through Redeemer's double doors. That morning the service was full. Easter was approaching. Rebecca sat beside her best friend, Katie Morrison, third row from the front. She took notes during the sermon. She always did. Neat cursive in the margins of a tiny notebook tucked inside her Bible. The pastor spoke of faith in the face of silence, of trusting when answers don't come. Rebecca nodded along. After the service, people lingered in the foyer. Handshakes, hugs. "How's your mama doing?" and "See you Wednesday night." Rebecca, as always, slipped out early. She had a habit of walking home alone, just a 10-minute stroll through 3 quiet streets and one patch of woods near the creek. Katie offered to walk with her, but Rebecca had waved her off with a grin. "It's fine," she said. "I like the quiet." That was the last confirmed interaction anyone had with her. By noon, Susan had returned home and started preparing lunch. Rebecca wasn't there, but that wasn't strange. Not yet. Katie called around 1:15 p.m. "Is Becca still there?" she asked. "She left before I did." Susan paused. "No," she said. "I thought she walked with you." By 2:30, Susan was calling neighbors. By 3:10, she was walking the streets herself, retracing every path, every corner, every tree Rebecca might have passed. By 4:00, she was at the police station, her voice shaking. "My daughter's missing." At first, the officers treated it like a runaway. "She's 15. It's probably a boy. She'll be back by morning." But Rebecca didn't take her Walkman. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't even take her journal, which she brought everywhere. Her room was undisturbed, the bed made, her Bible gone. She's not the type to run, Susan told them. She was excited for Easter service. She had a speech prepared for youth group Wednesday night. Still, the initial response was quiet. A missing poster. A few questions around the neighborhood. No active searches. No dogs. No helicopters. It was as if the earth had opened and taken her in silence. Katie later recalled a strange moment in the parking lot, a brown, older model station wagon idling near the far fence. She couldn't see who was inside. Just someone. Waiting. Rebecca had glanced that way once before walking off. Another churchgoer, Mrs. Eunice Marks, thought she remembered seeing Rebecca pause near that car. But she wasn't sure. No one had paid attention. Why would they? Nothing bad ever happened at church. The woods were searched. Volunteers combed the creek. No torn fabric, no footprints, no drag marks, just whispers and second-guessing. Maybe she wanted out, someone said. She always seemed too perfect, another offered. But her mother knew better. Rebecca had left behind everything she loved. She never made it home. And no one saw where she went. Weeks passed, then months, and the town, as small towns do, moved on in subtle ways. Rebecca's name was mentioned in prayer less and less. Her seat in youth group was quietly filled. The yellow ribbon on the church's oak tree frayed, darkened, and eventually vanished. Susan did not move on. She left the church within the year, refused to stand in the same pews, breathe the same air. Frank kept working, saying little aging fast. The marriage strained under weight no man could carry. There were no anniversaries in the Walsh household anymore. No birthdays. Just one date etched in every calendar, April 5th. No body, no witnesses. No signs of struggle, just silence. Detectives came and went. Case files grew thin, then dusty, then cold. In her bedroom, untouched for years, sunlight still fell across the pale pink bedspread. On the dresser sat a music box. Inside, a ballerina turned to a lullaby, its spring rusted now stuck in an eternal pause. And in the town of Macon, Georgia. Time continued, slowly, relentlessly, until 18 years later a wall spoke. April 1992 faded into summer. The dogwoods bloomed and withered. The ribbons tied around trees began to sag, gathering dust and rain. Rebecca Lynn Walsh had been missing for 31 days. And then 60, and then 90. There was no arrest, no memorial, just absence and a girl in a yellow dress who walked out of a church one Sunday morning and never came back. But in the town of Macon, Georgia, whispers linger longer than echoes. And soon one name began surfacing in hushed tones, Franklin Dawes. Franklin Dawes was the church custodian, quiet, polite, mid-50s, kept mostly to himself. He handled keys, doors, lighting repairs, anything that needed fixing. Franklin was the man. He was also the last person, aside from Katie Morrison, confirmed to have seen Rebecca that morning. She was carrying her Bible real close to her chest, he'd said to police, waved goodbye, walked out alone. That's all he remembered, or so he said. When pressed, he added a detail. He thought he'd seen Rebecca pause near the back fence. Might have been a car parked there, he mumbled. But I can't be sure. No make, no model, no plate. Just a brown car. Katie Morrison remembered more. In a second interview, she told detectives about the station wagon tan rusted near the wheel wells parked at the far end of the gravel lot. I remember thinking it didn't belong, she said. Most folks parked up front. She remembered Rebecca glancing toward it, then looking away quickly. She didn't get in, didn't speak to anyone. But something had caught her attention. Katie's voice wavered as she recalled it. She looked nervous, not scared, just like tense, like she knew whoever was inside. Mrs. Eunice Marks, who always left church last to lock the choir robes, recalled a similar vehicle. It was there the week before, too, she said. I thought it was someone's cousin or nephew. Nobody asked. Detectives tried to trace any visitors or outsiders attending services. Nothing stuck. No wedding, no funeral, no new members. The brown car became a ghost, present only in fragments, half-memories, and contradictions. Meanwhile, Susan Walsh clung to the police for updates. But the tone had changed. At first, we're working every angle. Later, there's no sign of foul play. Then, she may have run away. Susan would slam her hand on the kitchen table. She didn't run, she cried. She didn't even take her toothbrush. She started sleeping on the couch with the front door unlocked. In case she walks in, she told her sister, she'll be tired. She'll want to come home. Frank Walsh, her husband, spent longer hours at work. He stopped attending church altogether. One night, Susan found him in the garage, sitting in the driver's seat of his truck in the dark. He didn't say a word. The community began to fracture. People took sides. Some believed Rebecca had run away, a teenage rebellion gone too far. Maybe she'd joined a traveling group, a cult, a boyfriend she'd never mentioned. Others believed she was taken abducted by someone local, someone trusted. But no one agreed on who or why or how. The only constant was the silence. A month after Rebecca's disappearance, the church held a vigil. Candles lined the pews. Songs were sung. Prayers were whispered. The pastor, voice trembling, said, "Let us remember Rebecca in the light and trust that God holds her wherever she is." Susan Walsh did not attend. She was in Rebecca's room, sitting on the floor, holding a hairbrush still tangled with brown strands. On the nightstand was a small index card with scripture, Isaiah 41:10, written in Rebecca's handwriting. "Do not fear, for I am with you. I will strengthen you and help you." Susan pressed it to her chest and wept. That summer, a teenager hiking near the woods behind the church found a torn piece of yellow cotton caught on a branch. Police collected it, bagged it, tested it. No blood, no DNA. No confirmation it was hers. But to Susan, it was enough. She folded the fabric, placed it in Rebecca's jewelry box, and locked it shut. In July, something shifted. Detective Dale Myrick, lead on the case, retired early, quietly, without explanation. A new detective, younger, sharper, stepped in. She reopened interviews, re-walked routes, and ordered soil samples near the rear church lot. Her name was Lila McCrae. She had grown up in Atlanta and transferred to Macon only a year before. To her, this wasn't just another cold case. It was a girl in a yellow dress who deserved to be found. McCrae began looking into past complaints involving church staff, any disciplinary actions, even rumors. She found nothing official. But she did find a name that reappeared twice in different witness notes, Dawes. She interviewed him again. He was polite, helpful, calm but vague. Said he remembered some of the service. Couldn't recall who he spoke to after. "It's been a while, McCrae nodded. Then asked why he never mentioned that he had keys to the church's basement, an area rarely used, mostly for storage, and not mentioned in the initial report. Dawes blinked. I didn't think it mattered. That detail triggered a search. The basement was dusty, cluttered with old choir robes, broken pews, holiday decorations. But something about it felt hollow, unsettled. In the far corner was a locked wooden closet about 4 feet wide. It hadn't been opened in years. Inside, nothing. Just damp wood, a rusted nail, and a faint odor, not rot, but mildew paper old glue. McCrae took samples. She took pictures. She logged it. But no body, no blood, no certainty. Just more questions. Katie, now 17, sat for a third interview. This time she said something new. She was scared of someone she admitted. She never said who, just, she told me she didn't like staying after service alone. Katie paused. She once said, if anything ever happens to me, tell my mom to check the back hallway. McCrae raised an eyebrow. The back hallway. The one that leads to the basement, by the choir entrance. Most folks never go there. McCrae brought that quote to Susan. Susan went pale. She wrote something like that, she whispered. In her Bible. A note. I thought it was just teenage drama. McCrae asked to see the Bible. Susan hesitated. It's missing, she said. She took it to church that morning. It never came back. So now the mystery wasn't just where Rebecca went. It was also where was her Bible, a girl who never left home without it, who scribbled notes, prayers, secrets in the margins. Somewhere it had to exist. Somewhere her voice still lived between those thin pages. In the end, that summer passed like all the others. Hot, sticky, slow. The town returned to routine. A new school year began. A new girl sat in Rebecca's seat. But every so often, someone would glance down Vineville Avenue and think about the girl in the yellow dress, about the silence, about the shadow that passed through their town and never lifted. And one woman sitting alone in a dark bedroom would whisper her daughter's name into the silence, hoping, praying someone somewhere was listening. It had been 3 months since Rebecca Lynn Walsh vanished. 3 months of unanswered prayers, unopened mail, and a place setting left untouched at the dinner table. 3 months since Susan Walsh could walk past her daughter's bedroom without pressing her hand to the doorframe. And inside First Redeemer Baptist Church, life continued. Choirs rehearsed. Babies were baptized. Bulletins were printed and folded every Saturday night. But in the third pew from the front right aisle, Rebecca's seat there, was a silence louder than any hymn. By midsummer, her name was no longer spoken aloud during Sunday services. The town had grown weary. Rumors had replaced conviction. And many, including the pastor, had begun shifting the narrative. We may never know why she left, he once said in a sermon, but we must remember to forgive, even when the story is unfinished. Susan was there that day, her first time back since the vigil. She stood in the rear just beyond the last pew. Her eyes didn't move. When the pastor finished, she left without a word. The truth was, Susan didn't believe Rebecca had left at all. Not on her own, not with a plan. And as the investigation stalled, she began doing something she never thought she would, investigating herself. She pulled out Rebecca's school binders, her journals, old letters, Sunday school crafts, photo albums, anything that might whisper a clue. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon in July, she opened Rebecca's second dresser drawer, the one her daughter had once kept locked with a pink key. Inside, buried beneath hair ties and dried rose petals, was a diary. Plain cover, worn edges, and within it a page that stopped her heart. Written in Rebecca's neat, slanted hand. He watched me again after the service. I told him no. I always say no. He said I was being ungrateful. If something happens, if I disappear, Mom will know. She always knows. Susan's hands shook. The ink had faded slightly, but the words burned through the paper. She sat down on the edge of the bed diary, open, breathing shallow. Who was he? Why had Rebecca never told her, and how many other entries had gone unnoticed? She brought the diary to the police the next morning. Detective McCrae was the one who received it. She read it 3 times, silently. "Has anyone ever in your daughter's life made her feel uncomfortable?" McCrae asked gently. Susan closed her eyes. Then she whispered, "There was someone. But I never thought." The man's name was Ethan Grady, mid-30s assistant music director at Redeemer in 1992. He had once tutored Rebecca in piano for a summer. Susan recalled a moment Rebecca had stopped taking lessons abruptly. She said she was too busy. Susan believed her. McCrae dug deeper. Grady had moved out of state in 1994. Now lived in Birmingham, Alabama. Never charged with anything. Married. 2 kids. McCrae requested a background check. It came back clean, but one detail stuck. He'd quietly resigned from Redeemer 6 months after Rebecca's disappearance. No announcement, no farewell service. Just gone. McCrae arranged a call under pretense, a casual inquiry. Grady was pleasant, cooperative. "I remember Rebecca," he said. "Bright girl, always polite." When asked why he left Redeemer, he paused, then said personal reasons. The conversation ended politely. But McCrae's instincts sharpened. Back in Macon, Susan kept reading. Rebecca's diary wasn't filled with revelations, but it carried patterns. Mentions of feeling watched, of being followed down the side hallway, and one line that chilled her. "I hate being alone in the youth hallway after dark." That hallway led to the back classrooms, near the choir room, and close to the staircase that led to the old, mostly unused east wing, a section of the church that had been sealed for renovations in the early 90s. Or at least that's what everyone had said. McCrae asked to see the blueprints of the original church building. She met with the county clerk, then the fire marshal. She noticed something peculiar. The sealed hallway, which supposedly had no access, had once connected directly to the church office, and behind that to the baptismal prep room, an area that by 1992 was rarely used. She asked Dawes, the church custodian, about it. He hesitated, then said, "That hallway's been closed off since before I started here." "But you started in '88. McCrae replied, "That hallway was sealed in '93. There was a pause. "Right," he murmured. "My mistake." McCrae requested access to the hallway. She walked it alone at first, flashlight and hand recorder running. The walls were dusty with fading Sunday school posters still pinned in places. A torn bulletin board, abandoned folding chairs, and one door at the end locked. The room behind it had no windows. It had no light. And faintly, just faintly, she could still smell old perfume, lavender, the kind Susan said Rebecca used. Forensics returned weeks later. No blood, no prints. But behind the old heater vent wedged in darkness they found a pencil, and on it teeth marks, small, slight, like someone had clenched it hard under stress. McCrae placed it in evidence. It wasn't proof, but it was presence. Rebecca had been here. Susan, upon hearing this, didn't cry. She simply nodded, stared out the window, and said, "I knew she never left. I knew." That Sunday she returned to church, not for service, but to sit alone in Rebecca's seat, 3 pews from the front, right aisle. She placed a single yellow rose on the cushion, then whispered, "I hear you, baby. I hear you now." In the pews of First Redeemer, where sermons echoed and choirs swelled, there was now something else, a presence, not fear, not certainty, but the hum of something unresolved, a mystery that refused to fade, and a mother who refused to let go. April 2010. A 2-story colonial house stood at the corner of Franklin and Pine, just 3 blocks from First Redeemer Baptist Church. It had peeling white paint, a leaning mailbox, and a basement that hadn't been touched in years. It had once belonged to the Simpkins family. Then it sat empty for nearly a decade. Now it was owned by Evelyn Rourke, a recent widow who decided to renovate and rent it out for extra income. Evelyn wasn't looking for ghosts. She was looking for new pipes. The basement smelled of mold and rotting insulation. The walls had water damage, and an old rust-stained boiler coughed every time the pilot light clicked. She hired a local plumber, Marvin Del Rey, to tear out the old drywall and check for leaks behind the east wall. What he found wasn't copper or mildew. It was paper. Soft, dry, and wedged tightly behind the plaster just at eye level. Marvin tugged it free and stared. It was a book. Thin, leather-bound, faded maroon. He turned it over, brushing off white dust and bits of drywall. The cover read only one word in gold script, Holy Bible. On the inside flap, written in neat blue ink, Rebecca Lynn Walsh. Easter Sunday, 1992. The police arrived within the hour. Detective Lila McCrae stood in the basement with gloves on, flashlight in hand. She turned each page carefully. The text was intact, if brittle. The margins were full, tiny notes in cursive, some with dates. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the same as the diary, the same as the quote on the index card. Rebecca's voice, silent for 18 years, had emerged from the wall. McCrae placed the Bible in a sealed evidence bag and scanned the room. There was no furniture, just scattered debris, old tools, and a stack of wood panels leaning in one corner. But on the back wall, barely visible beneath the torn drywall, was a faint dark stain. It wasn't blood. It was ink. Words. She stepped closer, clicked on a stronger beam, and read, "I didn't want to follow him." Faint. Faded. Written directly on the plaster in pencil. The words trailed off, ending in a broken underline. The house had once been owned briefly by a relative of the church's former music director, Ethan Grady. Records showed Grady had stayed there during renovations at his apartment in early 1992. He'd listed the address on a DMV form dated March of that year, 1 month before Rebecca vanished. The connection, once dismissed as weak, was now undeniable. Susan Walsh sat in silence when McCrae showed her the Bible. She didn't touch it, didn't cry. She stared at the name inside, then closed her eyes. "I told you she wouldn't leave it behind," she said. "I told you." The discovery reignited the case. Local media picked it up. The Macon Chronicle ran a headline, "Rebecca's Bible." Found 18 years later, old rumors surfaced again. The church issued a carefully worded statement. "We pray for Rebecca's family during this time of renewed attention and sorrow. We continue to trust in God's justice." But behind closed doors, questions boiled. Who put the Bible there? Why that wall? Why wait 18 years? And if she had written that message, "I didn't want to follow him," then where had she gone? McCrae ordered a full forensic sweep of the basement. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Nothing. No remains. No trace of struggle. Just silence and that single voice preserved in paper and graphite. They traced the original drywall materials back to a renovation order made in June 1992. The contractor listed was Dawes Construction, a small operation owned by Franklin Dawes's cousin. Dawes himself was listed as labor coordinator. He had worked on that very basement. Had the Bible been hidden intentionally, or had someone panicked, trapped in a moment, and buried the truth beneath plaster and wood? McCrae re-interviewed Dawes. Now 73, he walked with a cane and lived alone. He offered no resistance. Let her in. Made coffee. "I told everything I know back then," he said. "Still don't know why everyone keeps bringing it up." McCrae placed the photograph on the table, the Bible's inscription in full view. Dawes's hand trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. "That looks like hers," he said. "She never left that church," McCrae said quietly. "Did she?" He didn't answer, just sipped his coffee and stared into the distance. Back at the station, McCrae reviewed the timeline. Rebecca left the church around 10:40 a.m. By 11:10, she was unaccounted for. Between the church and the Simpkins house was a wooded shortcut used by teenagers and kids walking home. The house was unoccupied at the time. Dawes had keys. Grady had stayed there. Rebecca may have been lured there or forced, and somehow her Bible and a final message were left behind. The public wanted an arrest, but there wasn't enough. No DNA, no eyewitness, no confession, only a book in a wall, and a mother's scream swallowed by time. Susan returned to the house with McCrae's permission. She stood in the basement for several minutes. No words. Then she reached out and placed her palm flat against the bare wood just beside where the Bible had been found. "I knew you were somewhere," she whispered. "I knew you'd speak when you could." Weeks later, Susan stood before a local news camera holding a framed photograph of Rebecca, smiling eyes, bright ribbon in her hair. "I don't need the courts," she said. "I just want people to remember her. She was kind. She was good. She had questions about the world and answers I'll never get." Then she looked directly into the lens. "And if you're the one who took her, I forgive you, but I won't forget." And beneath the town of Macon, beneath old drywall and quiet soil, a girl's Bible still rests in a police evidence vault. The ink is fading. The paper is fragile. But the message remains. The Bible sat beneath a halogen desk lamp in a temperature-controlled room at the Macon Police Department. It had been cataloged, scanned, and sealed. But Detective Lila McCrae couldn't let it go. Every few nights after the rest of the squad had gone home, she'd unlock the archive drawer, slip on gloves, and flip slowly through its pages, not as a cop, but as a listener. Not for fingerprints, not for DNA, for something else. The voice of a girl who had vanished. Rebecca's Bible was filled with scribbles, not just verses underlined, but entire commentaries in the margins, thoughts, questions, worries. March 22, 1992. A note beside Psalm 121. I lift my eyes to the hills, but where does my help really come from? I asked Mom this today. She didn't answer. March 29th, underlined Proverbs 3:5. He said, I don't trust enough, but I do. I trust God, not him. McCrae leaned closer. The he kept appearing, always lowercase, never named, but persistent. April 2nd, 3 days before she vanished. He asked me to come help with music storage again. I told him I had to go home. He got quiet. Said, You don't want to hurt my feelings, do you? The words were cramped at the edge of the paper. Pencil, not pen. Like she was afraid to leave a permanent record and yet needed it, said. Susan Walsh confirmed the Bible was Rebecca's primary outlet. She didn't keep a diary regularly, she said. Just little notes like prayers, that was her way. To Susan, the margins told a story no one had seen one about manipulation, coercion, and quiet fear. A slow drowning beneath the surface of routine. She was trying to tell someone, Susan whispered. She just didn't know who would believe her. McCrae began cross-referencing dates. Rebecca's notes corresponded with Sunday services sermons, youth nights, and one-on-one music lessons. Every instance lined up with someone being present in that building with her Ethan Grady, the assistant music director, gone 2 months after she disappeared. McCrae called Birmingham PD. They visited Grady's home under a separate inquiry. He was cordial, unbothered, and again, cooperative. But when they asked if he'd ever been alone with Rebecca, his tone shifted. Not that I can recall, he said, yet records showed she had signed into youth choir practice 3 times that spring. On nights only, he had the keys. Back in Macon, McCrae re-interviewed Katie Morrison. Now, in her early 30s, married with children, Katie had moved 2 towns over. She agreed to talk. When shown the Bible notes, Katie's expression froze. She told me about that, she said. The music storage, she hated it. Did she say why Katie hesitated? Then, she said he stood too close, touched her back when he didn't need to. McCrae waited. She never said more, just that she didn't feel safe. The wall was closing in. Rebecca had drawn the map. The margins were her trail. But the system still needed more, a pattern. A second voice, someone who had been there and survived. Then came a phone call from a woman named Abigail Dunn, age 40. She had seen the recent news coverage. She had once been in the Redeemer Youth Choir, and she had something to say. I was 14, Abigail said. He was always nice, always smiling. But one time he asked if I could stay after to help carry hymnals. Her hands trembled as she held the phone. I went down to the storage room with him. He closed the door behind us. There was a long pause. I got scared. Nothing happened. He just stood there, smiling, said I had a pretty voice. She never went back. Her story mirrored Rebecca's entries. Same room, same line, same tactic. McCrae took a formal statement. She added it to the case file. It still wasn't enough for charges, but it was enough for truth. Susan read Abigail's words and broke, not in rage, but in recognition. She was never alone, she said softly. He did this before. He tried, and this time he didn't stop. Back in evidence, McCrae opened the Bible again. She found a folded slip of paper between the pages of Matthew chapter 10, written in small script torn from a spiral notebook. "If this is the last thing I write, God knows I was afraid, not because of death, but because no one saw me. Not really." McCrae sat for a long time after that. No sound, no movement, just the hum of the lights and the voice of a girl still trying to be heard. That night Susan lit a candle in the window, not to guide anyone home, but to remind the town Rebecca's story wasn't buried. It was written, page by page, in the margins. First Redeemer Baptist Church hadn't changed much since 1992. The white columns were still clean. The wooden pews still groaned with the same familiar weight every Sunday morning. The choir still wore deep burgundy robes. But in the far end of the building, just beyond the fellowship hall and behind a pair of locked double doors, there was a place where no one went anymore. The East Wing. It had been sealed for renovations in the mid-90s, but no work ever began, no budget approved, no contractor assigned. It simply stopped being used, and people stopped asking why. Detective Lila McCrae didn't forget, not after the Bible, not after Abigail's testimony, not after reading Rebecca's final note. She filed a formal request to inspect the East Wing, citing the location's potential link to a missing person investigation. 2 days later, she received the key. Old, brass, still labeled Church, East Wing, Maine. She turned it over in her palm for a long time. It was early afternoon when she stepped through the double doors. Dust exploded in the light. The hallway was narrow, lined with faded blue carpet and cracked beige walls. Posters for Vacation Bible School still hung in frames, edges curling with age. Down the hall she passed unused classrooms with child-sized chairs stacked against chalkboards untouched since the Clinton administration. At the very end was a heavy wooden door. It led to the baptismal preparation room, where church members once stood before being immersed in the baptismal pool above, a place of cleansing, rebirth, and maybe something darker. McCrae clicked on her flashlight. The room smelled like mildew and dust. A faded linen robe still hung on a rusted hook near the door. A small stool rested in the corner. But what caught her eye was the floor dirt-stained, discolored in a square pattern as if something had once stood there and had been removed. She knelt down, ran her fingers along the baseboard. The wood there was slightly warped, not by water but by force. Something had once pressed down repeatedly. Something heavy, or someone. She ordered forensics. 3 days later, cadaver dogs hit on that room. Twice, soil samples were taken, luminol sprayed, and though no blood was found, something else was. Hair fibers, 3 strands, brown, long, microscopically consistent with a sample from Rebecca's childhood hairbrush. Not conclusive, but close. Then came another discovery. A piece of jewelry tucked beneath the floor vent. A silver necklace. The chain snapped. The pendant simple, a tiny cross. Susan Walsh identified it on sight. "I gave it to her the day she was baptized," she said. "She wore it every week." The investigation shifted from missing person to presumed homicide. McCrae called it a functional confirmation Rebecca had been here, not just in the church, but in this forgotten room. Somehow she had gone from the sanctuary above to the silence below. McCrae interviewed every living staff member from 1992. Some had moved, some refused, but one agreed. Harold Kinney, the former church janitor, now in assisted living. He remembered something. "I was told not to clean there," he said. "They said that wing was off limits, said it was being reserved for what McCrae asked." He shook his head. "I always thought it was odd, but back then, you didn't ask questions. Not in church." The timeline was tightening. Rebecca left the sanctuary around 10:40 a.m. Grady was confirmed to have access to the east wing. The side hallway behind the choir room, which Rebecca had referenced in her Bible, led directly to this space. And in 1992, no cameras, no chaperones, no eyes, just silence. McCrae asked the church board to unseal the maintenance logs from the 90s. Buried in a yellowed ledger, one entry stood out: April 6, 1992. Baptismal light bulbs removed, power disconnected. Room closed until further notice. That was the day after Rebecca disappeared. Back at the station, McCrae spread photos across a table: the baptismal room, the necklace, the Bible from the wall. The quote, "I didn't want to follow him." She stared at them like puzzle pieces, tried to hear the sound they made when pressed together. The story was there, just under the surface. And then a break. A retired church secretary, Janice Muir, called the tip line anonymously. She had kept a journal. Nothing official, just notes from her 22 years of service. She agreed to share them quietly. No names, no spotlight. In an entry dated April 8, 1992, "Strange meeting this morning. Pastor Mr. Dawes and Ethan in the back office. Closed door, raised voices. Someone said, 'We need to shut that room down. No one goes back there.' 3 men, 3 keys. One secret. Susan was told about the baptismal room, the necklace, the stain. She nodded slowly. She was baptized in that pool, she said. Then her voice broke, and maybe she died under it." Later that week, McCrae returned to the room, alone. She stood in the center, flashlight off. Let her eyes adjust. A single shaft of light broke through a crack in the boarded window above. It landed perfectly on the spot where the necklace had been found. Dust danced in it, particles of memory, unspoken truth. She whispered one word, "Rebecca." No charges were filed. The evidence was strong, but still not enough. Not yet. But for McCrae, for Susan, the room was no longer just a space. It was testimony. And the light that once symbolized rebirth now revealed something buried. Franklin Dawes lived on the edge of town now, a 1-story home with flaking paint and sagging gutters, curtains always drawn, wind chimes that hadn't moved in years. He was 73, retired, alone. His name had surfaced again and again in notes, interviews, maintenance logs. His signature was on the ledger that sealed the East Wing. He'd overseen repairs at the house where Rebecca's Bible had been found, and in 1992 he had access to every door, every hallway, every corner of First Redeemer Baptist Church. He was the keeper of keys. Detective Lila McCrae sat across from him at a dusty kitchen table. He didn't flinch when she arrived, didn't ask why she'd come. He simply offered coffee and sat down slowly, as if time were a weight on his shoulders. "I remember her," he said. "Rebecca, polite, smart, always smiled at me when I passed." He stirred cream into his mug. The spoon clinked softly. She was one of the good ones. McCrae didn't start with accusations. She started with photos. The Bible, the necklace, the note on the basement wall. Dawes looked at each one, his face unreadable. "I don't know anything about that," he said, eyes fixed on the grain of the table. "I think you do," McCrae replied. "I think you've known for a long time." There was silence. Then he spoke slowly. "Sometimes people think they know what's going on," he said, "but churches, they keep things quiet." He didn't look up. Too quiet. McCrae leaned in. "Did you see her that morning?" After the service, Dawes nodded. She was walking down the hallway, the back one, alone. "Did you follow her?" He shook his head, but didn't answer with words. Just that shake, small, reluctant, haunted. "You were the last person with keys to the East Wing," McCrae pressed. "You coordinated drywall at the Simpkins house. You were in the meeting that decided to close the baptismal room." Each fact hit like a slow drumbeat. Still Dawes didn't react, didn't deny, didn't confirm, until McCrae said the name out loud, Ethan Grady. Then finally his eyes lifted, something in them cracked. "He was persuasive," Dawes muttered. "People liked him. He had charm." He set down the spoon. "You don't say no to someone like that. Not in a place like Redeemer. Not if you want to keep your job or your family in the pews." McCrae let the silence breathe. Then, "Did you see what happened to Rebecca?" Dawes closed his eyes and whispered, "I saw her go in." It wasn't a confession, not legally, but to McCrae it was enough. Enough to know that the story Rebecca told in Margins and Shadows was real, that someone had stood by, held a key, and walked away. Word of McCrae's visit spread quickly. A local reporter caught wind of it. An article appeared, "Former church custodian questioned in cold case." The church board held an emergency meeting, issued another statement. "We are cooperating fully. The church condemns any past actions that may have enabled harm." But no names, no apologies, no justice. Not yet. 2 days later, McCrae received a package, no return address. Just a small cardboard box inside it, an envelope, and a set of keys. The envelope read, "I should have done this years ago." Inside were 5 church keys, including one labeled East Wing, Baptismal, and a typed note. I locked the room. I didn't know what would happen after, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I hope this brings you closer to her. No signature, but it didn't need one. Susan held the keys in her hand. They were cold, heavy. "I used to think these doors meant safety," she whispered. Then, turning them over, "Now I know." They were silence. That week she returned to the church one final time, this time with her son. They stood at the back hallway. At the door Rebecca once walked through. Susan placed her hand on the frame. "She was here," she said. "She passed through this threshold, and no one opened the door behind her." Back at her home, she sat down at Rebecca's old desk. She wrote a letter not to the police, not to the town, but to the girl she lost. "You were always brave, even when they didn't believe you, even when they tried to bury your voice. You left clues, and now the walls are talking. I hear them, baby, and I won't stop until everyone else does too. The case remained open. No charges filed, no arrests. But the man with the keys had finally surrendered them. And with them, a piece of the truth. It was a Sunday, April 4th, 2020. Exactly 28 years to the day since Rebecca Lynn Walsh walked out of First Redeemer Baptist Church and into silence. This time the sanctuary wasn't filled for Easter. There were no lilies, no choir robes, just a podium, a microphone, and a framed photo of a 15-year-old girl in a yellow dress, smiling softly at a camera long forgotten. Her mother stood beside it. Susan Walsh hadn't been inside Redeemer in over 2 decades. She walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing off the old wooden floor, carrying a worn Bible and a bouquet of white lilies, Rebecca's favorite flower. She placed both on the 3rd pew, right aisle, Rebecca's seat. Then she stepped to the podium, hands trembling, heart steady. The audience included old friends, new faces, Katie Morrison, Detective Lila McCrae, and a few reporters seated quietly in the back. But Susan didn't speak for them. She spoke for one. Rebecca loved this church she began, even when it stopped loving her back. Her voice didn't shake. She was kind, devout, curious. She believed people were good, that faith was safe, that the truth mattered. She paused. And when she tried to speak, no one listened. Susan reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a photocopy of one of Rebecca's Bible notes. "If something happens to me, Mom will know. She always knows." She held it up. She was right. In the weeks after Dawes returned, the Keys McCrae had compiled the full case file. It was incomplete, but powerful. Timeline witness statements, physical evidence, circumstantial threads. It painted the picture. Rebecca didn't run. She didn't wander. She was followed into the East Wing, into the baptismal room, and then disappeared. No charges were filed. The district attorney declined to pursue prosecution, citing lack of forensic evidence and statute limitations for non-homicide crimes. But McCrae didn't close the file. Instead, she opened it to the public. In May 2020, a local TV affiliate aired a 3-part documentary titled "The Girl Behind the Wall." It sparked national attention. The story of a vanished church girl whose Bible reappeared 18 years later, it resonated. People called, wrote letters. Other women came forward, some with stories, others with sympathy. Rebecca had never been alone. The FBI quietly reclassified the case, unresolved homicide with probable custody. A cold case, but now a known one. Back in Macon, Redeemer changed too. The East Wing was reopened, repurposed, turned into a memorial space. A plaque was hung near the hallway in memory of Rebecca Lynn Walsh, 1977. She walked in faith. She never walked out alone. Katie Morrison visited the space with her daughters. "They ask me who she was," Katie said, voice soft. "I tell them she was brave. She told the truth, even when no one believed her." She knelt down beside the plaque. "I believe you, Becca. I always did." Susan received hundreds of letters from strangers, survivors, other mothers. She kept them all in a shoebox by her nightstand. One morning she opened the box and found a note folded inside. There was no return address. It read, "She gave me courage to speak, to remember. Thank you for raising a daughter who told the truth." And then the walls spoke one last time. Contractors renovating the main sanctuary in 2021 discovered a small tin box wedged behind a support beam hidden between insulation and paneling near the choir loft. Inside was a cassette tape, labeled simply April 5th Practice. They handed it to the police. It was reviewed and preserved. The tape contained a 22-minute recording the choir's rehearsal for Easter Sunday. But about 18 minutes in, a faint voice could be heard in the background, muffled, panicked. Female. "Please don't. I just want to go home." Then footsteps, a door, silence. The audio was inconclusive, no way to prove who said it, but to Susan it was her daughter. And to McCrae, it was the final thread. In the final scene of the documentary aired nationwide, Susan Walsh stands outside the church at sunset. She holds the Bible, the original faded and worn, finally returned to her. She looks up at the steeple, golden in the dying light. Then she says, "We waited 28 years for a door to open." But the truth was always there, written on the walls, whispered through the vents, echoing in empty pews. She turns toward the camera. And now, the silence is over. The final shot fades to black. Then a quote, "Justice is not always the gavel. Sometimes it's the voice that refuses to be buried."